Hey, how's it going? Christian, Gabor?
Yeah.
Hey everyone.
Hi everyone. Good, thanks. And yourself?
Doing well. Weather is surprisingly warm for February. What is nice? Mid 70s over here. Are you back in Germany, Christian?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
Snow just melted here in the north. Yeah.
Gabor, where are you located?
In Hungary,
Oh, okay.
next to Budapest. And the weather forecast is, I mean, it's cold here, but getting to the end of the cold, so it's getting better and better.
Give some people time. I saw Russell in the notes, and we have his note taker here, so I assume he'll be showing up. I can't remember if we're actually recording this or just using Russell's note taker.
I think the note taker also records.
Okay. We'll give it just one, maybe 2 more minutes and then get going.
It says recording and taking notes. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, we're at the 5-minute mark, so why don't we go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for joining. I'm going to go ahead and go through the highlights for Java and then hand it over to Fokko, who did highlights for the other languages. And as usual, there's a lot of activity since the last time, so this is just a distilled portion of what I extracted from the commit log. So first thing I want to do is actually thank JV and everybody else who participated in lots of the license and notice stuff, which still continues to go on. I believe we also got some of that backported to maybe the 1.7 branch, so I don't know if we are planning to do a 1.7.2 release. I didn't add that to the releases section. Maybe somebody else did. But thank you very much. It's very important, and I think it's good just to keep our license and notice house in order. So for anybody who's doing reviews or watching PRs as they're coming in, pay specific attention to any sort of version updates or anything that touches like our library definition, where we keep all of the libraries that we reference within the Java repo, just to make sure that if something does change, if somebody is adding a dependency, or if there's some sort of update, that we do diligence for license and notice, and we don't get into a bad state again. So just a reminder. Okay, now on to the highlights. So the first thing, Auth Manager, we had 2 more parts that went in recently, and I think we're on the cusp of getting the final one in. This last one is going to be the one that actually switches us over. So thank you, Eduard, Alex, and we're going to have to do a fair bit of reviewing and validating, because this will be the final cut over to the new auth. Excited about that. Let's see, the next one, Steve and Hongwei, if I said that correctly. So statistic files and rewrite table path in Spark 3.5. You know, there were some updates to how we handle some of the metadata loading in Jackson. I think that was Brian Keller. I don't think that actually got his name on there, but thank you, Brian, for that. Ryan has been working quite a bit on some of the variant support, and he also added, and this is helpful for anybody who is interested in some of like the discussion around file format support, that we have this internal data class now, which is kind of similar to some of the other generic readers and writers interfaces, but it allows us to pull Parquet in dynamically into being able to work with the metadata. So for anything like, you know, partition stats or anything else we need to work with Parquet out of core, we now don't have to like suck in the entire file system dependency, or I mean file format dependency, and all the transitive dependencies, which was a little bit of a concern, and we had a big thread on the mailing list about that. And then it overlaps a little bit with what I think we're going to talk about later with Peter's PRs around like how do we, you know, kind of support file formats and do exploration and things like that going forward. So that's a really great one. Default values is another thing. I forgot to add that to the V3 list down below, but default values, that's a part of V3 that has been out there for quite a while, but it actually, let me go ahead and share this doc since somebody else is. It hasn't been implemented, and so now I believe we have default readers, and I believe that they're supported both in Spark and in Core and API. So I don't think I have the one for Spark here, but I believe that that's in. Next one, Gabor, remove schemas to the REST update or REST update type, so we can actually signal to a catalog that we want to remove schema references. This is important, especially for that like metadata bloat problem that we've had in certain scenarios, especially if you're using something like Kafka Connect with schema evolution turned on. You know, now there is actually a mechanism to remove some of the unused schema references. I think that there's probably still other things we need to do from a maintenance perspective to kind of complete that, but this is really important to enable that ability. There was a discussion about updating the register table to allow for overwrite. Thank you very much for adding that to the spec. So this allows you to register a table, and if there is an existing table, it's kind of a signal to force overwrite that table. It was unclear what the behavior was supposed to be if there was an already existing table, so this just kind of clarifies that and gives us the ability to either register a new table or overwrite an existing one. Iowa has been working on some of the variant support as well, so both Iowa and Ryan. So there's been a lot of work going on in the variant space. Ryan is also working on some of the like metrics evaluators and other things to handle statistics. So these initial things are just kind of getting the type support and some of the readers and writers in. Eduard, thank you very much for fixing an issue that we introduced by adding the view endpoint checks. This was necessary in order to kind of support some of the check or the capabilities, but the way that we introduced it actually broke backward compatibility. So we got this out into the baseline, and I think this is included in the 1.8.1 release to fix those issues. Handle partition evolution case in partition stat. So Denny's, thank you for that. Kafka Connect SMTs, I think this was just added. So this is some of the functionality for any of the CDC use cases, DMS, Debezium. You set them up as SMTs, and you can configure the Kafka Connect in order to handle the, the updates from the CDC. I don't think that we actually support the deletes yet, and there's an ongoing conversation about like how do we actually support deletes with the Kafka Connect implementation, but at least with this we can capture like the event information. And as I was going through, there were just lots and lots of doc updates, site updates, deprecations are underway, removing things that have been dereferenced and are ready for removal. And of course, like lots of dependency updates. So for all of the people that have been contributing to those things, thank you very much. There have been lots and lots of additions, and it's great to see that we're keeping the docs up to date and clean. I think that there's even a discussion topic later for some things that we might want to do about refactoring some of the docs in the site. With that, there are a couple spec updates that went in. Geo-type support, Zihan is working on that as well. I think that we've got that further down in the V3 section. And the equality deletes and row lineage vote, I believe, went through, and we've added that as well. So it's great to see that we can actually support both of those at the same time. That really enables us to hopefully enforce row lineage always, so that we don't have to make users choose whether to turn it on or not. User choice is always difficult. We don't want to have to flip a lot of flags. So with that, I will hand it over to Fokko.
Thank you, Dan. And sorry for not correctly updating the links, Kevin. That's a good one. The links are not working. I will add like pull in there later. Yeah, so for Rust, we have like the strict metrics evaluator in there. For those who don't know what it is, it allows you to check like if you, for example, do like a delete operation, that you can throw away like a whole parquet file. So they will make deletes in Rust much more efficient, which is very exciting. There's a view metadata builder. Thanks, Christian, for working on that. So this allows you to modify like the metadata of the view with all the checks being applied to the structure. So make sure that everything is valid. We got the nightly builds for Bi-Iceberg core in there. Thanks, Kevin. This actually also uncovered like a bug in the Rust code that we could fix right away. So that was pretty nice. We added Puffin reader. First steps into the implementing deletion factors in Iceberg Rust as well. Thank you, Faruk, for working on that. And we got like a first step of the scan planning for read, merge on read. So that's like equality deletes, positional deletes. They're on also deletion factors. Thank you, Scott, for working on that. He also created like the follower PRs. He broke everything very nicely down into chunks. So if you're interested in reviewing that, feel free to jump on that as well. Let's go to Bi-Iceberg. We finally got like upsert support in there. Thanks, Matt. It was like a great, pretty big PR, but we got it in there. And I've been using it and it works very nice. So I'm very excited about that. After a very long time and people were still interested in it, like we got like finally the authentication in there. Thank you, Yodin, for doing the base work there. We got like polished up and got it in there. So we'll also be part of 0.9. Previously for non-res catalogs, we didn't clean up like the old metadata. So that's also been fixed. Thanks, Kaushik, for working on that. We finally got like a residuals evaluator in there as well. So thank you to Shar for working on that. It was a big one with all the tests. Like the code itself was pretty small. It was like, I think 60% of it is like, maybe 80% is like tests. It actually allows us to rewrite like the predicate. So if one part of the predicate is being already satisfied by the partitioning, then we don't need to filter on that anymore. So that actually makes the reads in in arrow more efficient, which is pretty cool, I think. We got like the column projection in there. So if you migrate like a table from Hive into Iceberg, then it can be, and with Iceberg you have like hidden partitioning, but that's not part of Hive. So then the partitioning is actually part of the Hive metadata, I should say. And that's now also working. So if you have like old legacy tables in Hive, you convert them into Iceberg tables, and you don't have like this column that you partition on in the table, then this will be projected into the final result. Thanks, Gabriel from Netflix. And then we have the nightly builds, also for Bi-Iceberg. So if you want to do some tests on the development, you don't want to install from GitHub, because then you have to have like the site and build chain in there. We also have like the nightly builds on the test PyPy. For Go, we added support for the register table. Thanks, Doa. We added like very nice documentation for the CLI. Thanks, Kenty. We added now also few related operations, for example, listing and loading views. Thanks also Doa. And also added pagination support for a new dual list table. Also thanks Doa. It's a lot of work being done by Doa actually. And for C++, we got like a backport of the standard expected. Thanks Yongguang. And there's actually like a PR on the Rust side, but it's actually introducing C FFI, that stands for foreign function interfaces, to Iceberg Rust. So that would actually allow us to call the Rust code from C++. So there's also a very lively debate. So yeah, if you have an opinion on that, please make sure to jump in there. Because yeah, it's actually, yeah, do we actually want to have like separate C++ implementation, or would this also satisfy like the need for the C++ user? So I think that's a very valid question. So yeah, make sure to jump in there if you have any thoughts on that.
Okay.
Next are the releases. Do you want to take those, Daniel?
I was going to hand it over to Edward.
Okay.
He's doing the 181.
Right now we are having an RC1 for Apache Iceberg 181 out. So yeah, please try it out and vote. Amongst the fixes that we're trying to ship are we're reverting the AWS SDK version to a version that doesn't have a particular issue with S3 compatible storage types. We're fixing some stuff. We're adjusting Jackson settings to handle large metadata JSON files, and fixing the regression in Parquet, and then also fixing a couple of backwards incompatible changes that we shipped in 180 around doing head requests for namespaces, tables, and views. And we're also writing again -1 if there's no current snapshot ID. So this is the behavior that we had before, and so we're gonna switch that behavior into 0, but now we roll that back. So yeah, please go ahead, try it out and vote. And I believe we also have 172. We're waiting for the license fixes. I forgot if they went in. JB, do you have any information on that? If he's here.
Well, I don't know if he's here.
I think he was traveling today.
Yeah, so basically 172 is really just waiting for fixes around license and notice files. And once we have those, we will ship also 172.
Okay, and who's release manager for the 0.9 Bi-Iceberg?
Drew is. I'm working with him for that.
Okay, do you want to do a quick overview of what's going into 0.9?
Ooh, okay. So it's been a while, I think, since last November, since we did a minor release. There's been, I think, 200 plus PRs. I haven't looked at the details yet,
Yeah.
but actually we cut RC2 and then we found an issue, so we're gonna cut out RC3 today. So I'll post something today on the dev list. But yeah, please validate and vote. It's pretty big one. So everything you heard for the last 2-3 months is all going in.
Okay. Okay. So any other releases or anything anybody wants to call out?
I'm just trying to check if we have any plan for the 1.9 release. Is there any release manager has been assigned?
Yeah, I'm working on 190 release. Once we have the partition stats and the auth manager PR is in, we can start the release maybe in after 2 weeks or so. We also have Spark 3.3.3 removed and few other things in already now.
Do we have any ballpark timeline for that?
It actually depends on the review. Once the review is completed, we can start it. But tentatively in a week or two, we can start with the release. Yeah.
Is there something specific, Ife, that you're looking to get out, or is it just kind of a general question about the timeline for 1.9?
Yeah. I think one of the question is about geo-type, because right now it's in May branch, but not a release yet.
Yeah. So there is a little bit of stuff on the V3 thing for the geo-type. So the geo-spec, you're just looking for a release for the geo-spec, is that what you're saying?
Yeah. So without release, actually, like nobody really can use that actually.
Yeah. So the spec itself, like once it's adopted, then it's part of the spec. Cause it's not like the spec isn't tied to like a specific release version or anything like that. So it's actually been voted on. Now we haven't adopted the V3 spec. So I would say that that's probably the bigger thing in terms of like, officially supporting geo-types. But obviously, I'm just saying that because like I don't think there's any specific implementation that's going into 1.9 unless we get some of the things that like Zihan is working on. There may be some just like type representation in the core and schema portions of the API. But I don't think that we have any actual implementation yet that's actually going out.
Yeah, there's PR for that, but yeah, I think still working process.
Okay.
Yeah, that's cool. I think it's good. That once we have a vote for the spec, then the spec is officially released.
Yeah. Well, it's in like so it is part of the spec, but the V3 spec has not been voted on. So because like geo-types and variants, DVs, like all those things are wrapped up in V3. Like we need to get all of that capability to a point that we're comfortable with reference implementations to say, okay, we're going to adopt the V3 spec, and then we can go use it. Now you can still set like V3 is the actual table version, and you can experiment with these. Like the DVs are already out there. I think variant will be available shortly, so we can start using some of those capabilities and building around it and validating. But until we adopt the V3 spec, we wouldn't consider that like a formal feature.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's kick it off to some of the agenda items. Peter, are you around? Yeah, there you are.
Yes, I'm here. So Ryan reviewed my five formatted API PR, and he has some suggestions about the actual APIs and stuff around that, which is very good because his review allows us to make bigger changes on the current API and start creating a more generic and more fitting API for current use cases. I started working on that, remove the service provider usage, their service loader stuff from there, and I'm still working on understanding the differences between the different writers and requirements there. How can we create a single appender and generically create the equality retries or position retries that's based on that. That will be some time to find a good solution. My main question here is that there are in Avro-Parky ORC, we will have a new appender API which we would like to implement, and this appender will likely be incompatible with the current one. So either we duplicate the code or we try to massage the code to reuse the things from the previous one. And for this, it's important to understand what are the plans for deprecating the old APIs. Do we want to keep them for the 2.0? And that it might be better to try to keep the code in a single place, or we can deprecate that sooner, and then probably the application is okay.
So for the APIs that are in the API module, like we do actually have strict semver, so that would require holding on to them until we get to a 2.0, right? So we need to support those. For other projects like the Parquet, the Orc, the Avro, well, Avro is part of core, but all of those, I believe, fall under the minor version semver deprecation cycles. So there may be some flexibility we can do within those projects in order to remove, but the actual the top level APIs we need to support until at least a V2. So that may end up kind of trickling down to those other projects because they will still need to be compatible as we look at like switching over APIs to something different. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, it's mostly like Avro appender and Parquet appender. It's probably not part of the core API, but we will see if it requires other changes down the line. Okay.
And just a couple like high level things as part of the PR. Like one is the reason that we went with like the internal data loading mechanism as opposed to like an SPI, like one of the things about SPI and why we've avoided it within Iceberg is because there's a lot of repackaging that happens, and that can really mess with the SPI, like the meta inf files and other things that define the services and like how people repackage, build fat jars, other things like that, which can cause a lot of complexity for how we do loading. So we're just preferring like keep SPI out of Iceberg just because of where it sits and how people are using the libraries. And then the other piece of that is just kind of like what our plan is for supporting file formats. We want to have a path forward so that people who are either building new file formats or want to test against different things, like they have a way to, fork the code base and, expand. I think partly to your point of like, hey, how do we have a set of APIs that people can implement and add a new, file format to the project? But we also want to be really cautious so we don't create fracturing where people are using all sorts of different file formats that are either partially or only in certain languages supported, and we end up just bifurcating the ecosystem in a way that makes things really incompatible. So we want a way for people to kind of validate and move forward and propose new things, but we also want to be kind of explicit about what we actually support and not let just like arbitrary pluggability of file formats go completely unchecked. Does that make sense, Peter?
Absolutely. That's why I kept the five format enumeration as part of the API. So it is, there is no way around that. So it is be like you mentioned.
Okay. So everyone take a look, please. Does this also get into was the compaction one yours as well, Peter?
Yes.
You want to go ahead and pick that up?
Okay, so the compaction one is an absolutely different story. It's coming from the Flink maintenance, table maintenance. During the Flink table maintenance development, we identified that basically the compaction planning part is common between the Flink and the Spark code. And I have discussed with Russell and Steven, and we came up with a new set of APIs where you have the planner and the runner for the compaction. The planner will be in the core. It will create the row groups, the compaction groups, and the runner will be the engine specific part, which will be implemented by Spark and Flink, and which will basically do the compaction part. We already have a PR for the API set, and I get the +1 from Steven and Russell. But if anybody is interested in and would like to take a look, I would be happy to wait a few days to get that in and start working on the actual implementation stuff.
Peter, would it be fair to say this is similar to scan planning in API?
Yeah, it's very much like that. Basically, the planning is there, and then the execution is depend on the actual engine.
But so basically what you're doing is you're pulling out the grouping logic from the Spark action and just pulling it into the core module so that it can be reused, right?
Yes, absolutely. I need to rewrite some APIs around that, but this is the main idea.
Okay, and does that include all of the different like bin packing and everything logic, or is that?
Yes, it will for the so this is for the data file compaction. It doesn't and the delete file compaction. So that's content file compaction. It doesn't touch the manifest compaction at this point. Probably we will have to do that later when we would like to do the manifest compaction in Flink as well. But this is the first step for the actual content file compaction.
Okay.
Cool.
Let's move on to the next one. I'm not sure who put this one on the agenda. Java version enforcement.
Oh, that was me. As part of verifying the RCs and just generally seeing other people running different Java versions, I think might be a good idea to add that we don't support Java 8 and all the way up to Java 21. I was thinking maybe there's a way to add this to the build step so that because in 1.7, 8 was removed, and 23 and verify it just doesn't work with Ming.
JB?
Yeah, I guess we have to double check the dependencies for that. I mean, building on different JDK version is fine, but we still have some dependency. I'm thinking about Spark or Kafka Connect and stuff like that, just to be sure that the JDK version we are supporting is actually supported by all dependencies. So I'm with you on that, Kevin, but I think that we have to double check that all dependency are. For instance, I'm not sure that Java 21 is fully supported by all of our dependencies today.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think the idea is it definitely doesn't work for 8, and it definitely doesn't work for 23. So those two, and the error message is confusing because for 23 it's about some like security manager or secrets, and 8 I forgot what it's about, but since we dropped it, it doesn't work. So maybe we can add those two.
It's about in 23 the security manager is not a module from a Java standpoint.
Right.
It has been deprecated, and so it means that you have to add especially the module, or you have to change to remove a security manager by something else. I mean, in a lot of Apache projects like ActiveMQ, Karaf, Camel, to support 23, we had to do a lot of changes just due to the security manager.
Yeah.
So not surprising for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the use cases that came up was someone was running Bi-Iceberg integration tests, and they spin up like it defaults to your shell's like Java version. So then they had 23 set, and then it was like a obscure error. So they thought it was because of something else. But I can add this to the dev list for a discussion or add it as an issue. I don't know what the next step, good next step is.
I would propose to go on with that, maybe. Oh, sorry, then.
Yeah. I was going to say the same thing. Just, I would put something on the dev list. I think it's obvious and pretty easy in Gradle at least to limit the lower end of that version. And then I think there's going to be an open question as to whether we just address the issues to support 23, because people may want to build with that and run locally with it, but I don't want to necessarily artificially constrain people on versions and even exploring that side. Our build infrastructure and everything else should be using whatever versions like JB mentioned are actually supported by the other projects that depend on Iceberg, which is largely what has driven us to support some of the older versions as long as they have. So we just want to make sure we're producing artifacts that are the most compatible, but we shouldn't limit what people want to do internally or anything like that. So yeah, let's just kick something off on the dev list, and we can decide whether we want to put the strict enforcement in initially, especially if the error messaging is really confusing, or if we want to just start tackling the 23 issues.
Yeah, thanks. The next one is also mine. there was a recent change to the main page to add a specification tab, or to move catalog from its own tab into specification. And I think just generally there might be some more moves for the main page, just to make sure that it's beginner friendly, I guess, and more like organized. One thing I brought up in that thread was making blog talks and possibly vendors into like a community subpage. I can also bring this up to the dev list, but just wanted to leave it here and see if anyone has any responses.
So I assume what you're talking about is like taking these three right here and collapsing them under a community.
Yeah. And if you go to project, project itself has a few sub pages that might be good to put in community. So like main one around like community guidelines, maybe contributing, but I think just some kind of organization around around this community aspect of it.
Yeah, I think that if we have a PR or something that's just like reorganizing these, like it's pretty easy to like run the site locally and people can kind of experiment and look. But yeah, definitely, I think that there's opportunity to consolidate some of that. JB?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good idea. It's basically what we have on Polaris as well. We have a community menu that contains talks, basically everything. I think it can help the community to find easily resources, because today I think it's spread on different menu. So yeah, I'm +1 for that, Kevin. So yeah, we can start with a draft PR that you can share on the dev mail list, just to notify everyone. But I don't see a lot of issue, about that. I think it's a good idea. Thanks for that.
Yeah, sounds good. I can do that.
Okay, I put this next one on here, and it was just kind of to round out the discussion around V3. Where are we? So as I mentioned earlier, we haven't tied specifically any specification release to any particular reference implementation release. So V3, 1.8, 1.9, whatever it is, like they're separate release paths. And where we stand right now is like we've done a lot of work towards V3, and I feel like we've kind of settled down about what we want to include in V3. And there are a number of things now that we're just kind of rounding out the implementations, which would then ultimately lead to a vote and an adoption of that version as a formal, supported version of Iceberg. So the main things that we have right now that are still ongoing is like the variant reference implementation, and I just wanted to share a little bit about like what's going on there. Obviously, the variant specification is in Parquet, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we address like all of the concerns from the Parquet community about making sure that they've got reference implementations for the implementation of the spec there. That includes both the variant specification and the shredding specification. So right now it looks like there's good progress being made on the Parquet Java implementation in Parquet, and then there's also Parquet C++ that's being looked at in the Arrow community as part of the Parquet implementation. And the hope is like once we round out those implementations and people are comfortable with that, Parquet will be able to adopt the variant spec. And that is a little bit of a precursor for us to be able to actually formally adopt the variant spec as well. Like we don't want to preemptively adopt it and have a change or something like that. So that's where variant is in terms of like the dependency on the Parquet community. The other piece is the actual implementation in Iceberg core. So this is something that Ryan has been working on, and we're working through the actual representation of variant, the APIs for it, the metrics evaluators for doing stats filtering and everything else. We're also looking at like, well, how do you actually extract variant values? And that's just using kind of like a JSON path kind of representation, just a subset of JSON path right now. So this is all ongoing work in the variant space, and we're hoping that will complete relatively soon here. The next one is row lineage. So Russell and some others have been working on some of the core API changes. Amog is looking in some of the support for adding this into Spark and tracking row lineage. And it's really exciting that we might be able to actually introduce this where row lineage is just like on every table by default. We have a couple of challenges in terms of the Spark implementation. One is that we can likely get this into Spark 3.4 because that was before we moved a lot of the merge plans and other things like that into upstream Spark. Spark 4 will likely include some native DSV2 APIs around row lineage, and it may fit in cleanly with those. 3.5 is a little bit of an open question about how we can support that, and that's largely because like some of the logic has already been moved into Spark, and we don't have as much influence over how we want to deal with that. So Amog is looking into some of those things right now. Geo-types also looks like it's making some good progress. Zihan has been working on this with some of the other people in the community. And then the last one, the DVs, those ones have already been released as part of 1.8. So if you're interested in playing around with the DVs, you can create a table of, version format 3. You can start, using DVs and experimenting with that. Or if you're integrating or building against them, feel free to, start that integration. Even though it isn't formally adopted, a lot of the functionality is out there. And then the last piece is just working on some of the maintenance and procedures for how do we handle the transition from a V2 table to a V3 table? How do you run the maintenance procedures? How do you clean up Orphan file, those kind of things? And Eduard's working on a lot of those areas. JB.
Yeah, just to have investigating about the multi-arg transforms, which is not yet, it's in V3, but is not yet implemented or let's say in the core. So I'm investigating this, and I also talk quickly with Peter about some stuff we need to support from V3 in Flink. So I'm working on this part of the implementation, just to be complete about V3.
Okay, and then there's one other one, which is the default values, and I don't know if anybody has looked into that from like the Flink perspective. That may be another one.
I'm working on this one. I did. You remember I did part of it on Spark, and so now I'm trying to do the same in Flink. So, but I need support from Peter and others. So yeah, that's going to be in review. I'm late about that, but I'm working on it.
Yeah, JB, I will be here this week, and I will be out next week. So if you have questions, please schedule it this week or the week after that.
Okay, got it. Thanks, Pete.
Okay. Kevin?
Hey, yeah, I have a quick question about the spec versus reference implementation. In terms of like ordering, is there any particular dependencies which related to like when we want to adopt a V3 spec, and when we do adopt, do we want to have certain reference implementations, for example, in both Java, Python, maybe Rust? Just like any comment around that, because we're looking to redo some of the Bi-Iceberg roadmap, and V-Series is definitely included. It's a big chunk of like the upcoming features, but just wondering how that plays out with like the spec adoption.
So generally what we've had for the Iceberg spec is that Java is considered the reference implementation, and so we want to have an implementation in Java. So like what we don't want to get into is like adding 3 features, and each one of those features is like in a different language. So like there's one implemented in Rust, one implemented in Python, one implemented in Java, and you don't actually have a cohesive implementation that handles all the things. So Java is the reference implementation. Some projects like Parquet, they adopt hey, we need 2 reference implementations. We don't have that. We think that the Java implementation is sufficient, and then the other ones can kind of catch up as adoption happens. I would say that like the approach Iceberg has taken is we do less frequent but larger updates between spec versions, and that just gives people a lot of time to figure out like what is changing and what needs to be done in order to support that next version. Even if it's not like every single feature is supported, like you can understand the corpus of things that are going in and you can work towards that, as opposed to like lots of incremental like spec changes that you have to implement, and everything is at slightly different levels of adoption. So this is why we do more of the major version updates. So in terms of actually adopting the v3 spec, I think what we want to have is a reference implementation in Java for every one of the features that we are introducing. That largely includes like, a Spark implementation or something in a distributed, kind of environment. A good example of something that was kind of a little bit split would actually be equality deletes, because that's largely like Flink supported equality deletes. There were some procedures and things in Spark and other, like read path. So there are cases where, not everything is just like a Spark related feature, but we want to make sure that we have the core Java API implementation, and then we have good support in at least one area to validate those kind of features. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we talked about the Parquet requirement for more than one language, so I thought this also applies. But yeah, thanks for that.
Any other questions about v3 comments? Definitely raise a hand if you have any work that's ongoing. We can get reviews and kind of move things forward. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Orphan files.
It was added by me. So the history here is that I started reviewing a PR that was meant to solve an issue where you have stats for your table and you update the stats. Then the old stat files become orphan files in your directory, and you only reference the new statistics files. So the PR, I think the approach wasn't good. I wanted to raise this issue here because I couldn't really recommend a good approach that we could follow here. You can imagine that whenever a user runs a compute stats, you just create a new statistic file and you reference it from your metadata, and you just leave the existing statistic files, the old ones, on the disk, and they can accumulate. For sure, if you run orphan file cleanup, you can get rid of those, but in case you drop your table, they will stay there forever, because dropping the table won't clean them. And this issue will also, let's say, will be a little bit more serious when we have the partition stats, because that will introduce another way of creating orphan files. And this is a very easy way. You just have to run compute stats or whatever the SQL for your engine that runs this. So there is this update statistics API in the table, and you just update it to a new file path, and boom, you have orphan files. And I had no idea how we could get around this. So there I had some like let's say proposals in mind, but in fact I found all of them insufficient. So let's say in case when you update the statistic file, you won't need the old one, so you could drop it. But it won't be good for readers who are actually currently reading the old statistic files now, because the reading will be broken in case you drop the files underneath. You could also create like a list of historical statistic files, and when you drop your table, you could go through the list of historical statistic files and drop them as well. But I think that could significantly increase the size of the table metadata, so that won't be a sufficient solution either. So I just wanted to raise this for a conversation, because I don't have a solution here. I just wanted to hear whether this is by design and the engines should take care about the orphan stat files, or what is the opinion of the community here?
Can I just get clarification on, like, so when you say, it's not, you have orphan stats files, is this when you're dropping the entire table, or are you talking about just the natural progression of these, like, aging out of the metadata references and not being cleaned up?
Well, this happens when you already have, let's say, a stat file, and for some reason you decide to recompute it. And then you have an orphan stat file there, and in case you drop the table, it will remain. But in case you, for example, do like expire snapshots, then even these orphan files will be there, so it won't be removed
Okay.
because they won't be referenced anymore.
Yeah, I think that there's a bigger question about like when you drop a table, like, well, what is actually responsible for cleaning up data under that table location? Which I think could be argued that is actually more of like a catalog concern than it is like a table implementation concern, because like, you know, dropping a table doesn't necessarily equate to wiping out everything underneath that physical location that was marked as like the table location. That's actually a complicated thing. So I just want to clarify that like under normal table operations, if you're just updating the table, you're running maintenance, you're running orphan files, those stats do get cleaned up, right? I mean, because they're dropping out of the reference and they will be removed by orphan files.
Yes, the orphan file cleanup will clean them up. Yeah.
Okay, so it's only this case of like, I have stats files, they are dangling now, and I dropped the table, and we were deleting everything that was referenced from the table as part of that drop functionality.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, Peter, did you want to jump in? Oh, sorry, I don't know who I do that.
My question is that so basically the stat file news when you recompute the stats file, you are creating a new stats file. What happens with the old stats file? It will stay on the disk, it will stay on the metadata directory, and it will not be referenced from any of the table metadata, or it is still referenced for the table metadata, and we have a way to clean that up.
It won't be referenced from the latest metadata JSON. Historical metadata JSONs might reference them, but I mean, this PR that is linked here tried this approach to go through all the available metadata JSONs, load them, and drop all the stat files referenced by them. But I found it too expensive, and there is no guarantee that you keep all of the metadata JSONs because those get expired as well. So in case you take the latest metadata JSON as a like the source of truth, there will be stat files that are not referenced from there.
And if your expire snapshots only considers the latest metadata JSON, it cannot remove the old stat files.
That's
so
right.
The expire snapshots is to fetch the old JSONs and then find the stats files and remove them.
Well, in theory, yes, but you won't keep all of the metadata JSONs because there is this logic that keeps the latest n and that is configurable. But in case you run out of n, you won't get rid of the stat files for the older ones.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for the clarification.
Yufei?
Yeah, I think this is expected behavior. I consider it's pretty much like Eduard. You have the structures and the failed, or it's already written certain the Parquet file and it's failed. Then some leftover files will be cleaned up only by the remove orphan file. So for the job table, when we delete files, we need to find the reference. Otherwise, it's very dangerous behavior to delete everything. This happens when we have like two table like happen to location there are some overlap between their location, and you're not supposed to delete the other files except the file you can reference from your version file, which is metadata JSON file, to everything else, the manifest files. And another thing, I think you mentioned that do we want to traverse back to the previous metadata JSON file? I don't think that's the approach we need to take. So we should always use the latest metadata JSON file as a source of truth for this table. Even there's branch, tags, everything else. We should always use the latest metadata JSON file. And the old one, we don't consider old one is the reliable truth. Even it has some reference to certain files within that directory. We should not do that.
I think that there's a little bit of a gap here, which I think is what Gabor is like pointing out, in that if everything goes perfectly, then snapshot expiration does incremental cleanup, and you largely don't have orphan files in your table, with the exception of the statistics file now, because that is actually not part of any sort of incremental cleanup. Now we have other things like the dangling data files or tasks that were, speculative tasks, files that were produced but not committed, failed jobs that produce files. There's a bunch of cruft that can gather in like the data directory and potentially metadata directory. Like if you do retries of metadata, all of those kind of things get picked up by the Orphan files. And some of them fall into the category of like nothing will clean them up incrementally, which is why you need Orphan files. So I think there's a question of like, is that acceptable for statistics files? Like, do we just treat it as that category of things that just get dereferenced and eventually has to be cleaned up by Orphan files? Or should there be some active, like incremental cleanup like we do with most of the snapshot kind of exploration?
I think snapshots itself, if the, for example, petition stat file will be cleaned up by the remove Orphan file, if I understand correct. Jensen can correct me, right? So if this particular status files attach certain snapshots, the ones we to expand that snapshot, it should be gone, right? We're only talking about like you failed or you recompute that particular file, then how do we handle that Orphan files?
Ajanta?
Yeah, I think the problem here is when they add the puffin file. So for a same snapshot, we allowed recomputing the statistics. So if the ads file is there, it is creating one more stats file for the same snapshot. So and one snapshot at a time points only one statistics file. So because of that, the old file is got orphaned. So we should check should we allow this one, because a snapshot is same. Nothing has changed in the backend data. So should we allow recomputing the stats, or in that case, can we replace the old file by deleting the old one and having the new one? And coming back to the PR, the PR was trying to handle the Orphan file in the drop table, which was not meant by that particular procedure to handle. So I think cleaning up whenever we are trying to replace it is a good idea than cleaning up it as Orphan.
So that would be like when you actually, after you commit the update to replace the statistics, you would delete the prior statistics?
Yeah, either we should not allow replacing the previous statistics, or we should clean then and.
I think that's problematic because readers will read at that time. I wouldn't do that. Even better to have Orphan files than delete files prematurely.
You can't go back to any prior metadata JSON and use it again because you've actually deleted something that it's referencing, right?
Or we can throw some error that the stats is already there. You can drop the stats and then you can compute it. So we can have a procedure to drop the stats and then they can compute it again. Something like
yes,
that.
I want to step back a little bit. Why do we recompute the stats for particular one? I thought there, once I have the a snap process being finalized and we computed the stats file, it should be considered as immutable. Is it, or
let's say you have some broken stat files and you want to recompute it, so you have to have a way for that. This is something. Another thing that I have in mind is that let's say we have partition stats, and now it has some required fields, but later on, in case we want to extend the partition stats with some optional ones, so it might be a valid use case that first we calculate the required ones and later on we also calculate the optional ones, let's say because they are expensive to calculate. And then you have to have a way to replacing the existing stats files with a new one.
But the stats are referenced from the metadata JSON. They can go out, like become non-fresh. So if you've computed stats for like a prior snapshot, something could still use those stats. It's just like, hey, we just need general, DBs, something like that. They can still use the old statistics, even if it's not the freshest. And then it's just a matter of like, well, how fresh do you need your statistics in order to consider them valid? So these things are kind of decoupled, but the point is the stats are not referenced directly from the snapshot. So they are not cleaned up as part of the snapshot exploration. They are only referenced from the metadata JSON. And if we're updating the metadata JSON, we never go and look at prior metadata JSONs to do any sort of cleanup operation. So they just get orphaned, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, it seems like you can either do more incremental cleanup, but we don't do expiration of like the metadata JSONs. That just gets handled by Orphan cleanup, which would mean that probably the stats just fall in that same category. I mean, so what is the concern here? Is it just that, because there were two things that we started out with. One was, hey, when you drop the table, and I think that's a completely separate use case. Like we have to be concerned about what happens to data under a table when it gets dropped. So I think we should kind of ignore that case. So it's now just kind of like under normal table maintenance and operation, do we have a problem with these being cleaned up with or by Orphan files? Are we generating too many of them?
Well, I think it's up to the users. So in case the users go wild and they just keep running compute stats for your table, then this could accumulate. I mean, in case you occasionally run Orphan file cleanup, it's fine because they will go away once in a while. I just wanted to raise this to the community to see whether this is by design or whether this is because no one thought about it, just to see if there is an appropriate way to avoid the situation. And then, yes, the other thing is that when we drop the table, I think that's also a concern that we leave files behind.
Yeah, that one I think is a catalog concern. We probably do need to discuss about like what do we do for path ownership or anything like that. But I would say this falls under the category of being handled by Orphan files right now. And unless we see that there's actually a challenge from like these files are too large or they're causing a lot of cruft in the metadata directly, like you always need to run Orphan files for all of the other reasons that you need to do it. So this doesn't seem like it's a special case that we need different handling for. And maybe that changes if we start producing tons of statistic and it just like really bogs down the metadata directory or causes problems for users. But it sounds like it's pretty decently handled by Orphan files at this point.
Okay. I mean, one reason that I thought it's worth discussing is because normally the reasons of having Orphan files is having a failure somewhere. If something didn't manage to commit or such. But now we are generating Orphan files with normally running whatever we are running without any failures.
That's fair.
Okay.
Sri, I want to get to you before we end. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a while.
I just want to say hello. I'm in the community for a long time. Heron was the primary project. Then before that, a lot more other ODT, and it started with struts and all that things. Recently met Christian at Iceberg Summit at AWS. I'm primarily working on OpenDAL Rust. That's where I landed with Iceberg Rust implementation. So that would be my focus going forward in connection. In addition to that, I do a little bit of blogging here and there to just promote the ASF and ASF projects. In this regard of the stats, I like Mr. Goo's idea that he mentioned, and also we can borrow the tombstoning from Cassandra or HBase. That may be another option for a design perspective. But for Gavor, sometimes the delete file they doesn't work for whatever the reason with the operating system file system permissions and the user that is using it, etc. So it could be a reason why that files are still there because as Mr. Gu sent the code, they are being deleted from that folder. So it's yeah, there's multiple things going on, I think, here. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we're over time already. Why don't we take this to the dev list and we can follow up with any discussion that we think may remain if there is any concern. But I think that covers everything except for the last bullet, which was register for the Iceberg Summit. It's coming up here April 8th and 9th, I believe. In person on the 8th, virtual on the 9th. If you can make it, that would be great. Love to see everybody in person. I know a lot of us are going to be there. It would be great to see everyone. Thank you. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.